Once again, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast app, I wish you had heard the conversation before the recording, because you would have heard Keith Getty say some things about me that, even though you're in Nashville right now, aren't you, Keith?
I am. We're actually only 25 minutes from each other as the crow flies. I'm just off Franklin Road.
Yep. So are you at your house?
Yeah, we moved house. We've moved house since I last saw you, though.
Oh, okay. Well, I liked your last house. You should have given it to me.
You never asked.
So we've got Keith Getty here. We're going to talk about a wide variety of issues. As a matter of fact, it's such a wide variety of issues that we're going to do two of these back to back. If you can stand it, Keith Getty, part one and part two. And Mark Clifton, who knows how you and I are going to interact with him, because usually when we interview Keith Getty, we just kind of step back and let it flow, because it flows. And we can define it at some point, Mark. Hey, Mark, before
Yep.
we get to ingratiating Keith, let's talk about your first Sing conference.
Yeah, my wife and I went to the Sing conference, the most recent one. I've been to conferences all of my life, dude. I've been to Baptist conferences, non-Baptist conferences for 40 plus years, all kinds of preaching conferences. I'm telling you, in my life, it was really transforming. I'm still very much impacted by it. I was impacted by it at the moment. I was very young in the Jesus movement, incredibly young. I was as a 12, 14-year-old kid, but I remember some of that. And then, I had a close relationship with Henry Blackaby, and I remember sort of in the 90s, sort of how there was sort of a spiritual awakening in some places through experiencing God. But man, what I experienced at the Sing conference, people all across the world, all across evangelical denominations with one heart for Jesus, man, it strengthened me. It encouraged me. It strengthened our marriage. We enjoyed it together. It is something that the church desperately needs. You and I, Tom, deal in revitalization and spiritual warfare. Nothing has fitted me more for the spiritual warfare I engage in daily working with dying churches than really the worship that I experienced in Nashville. I mean that with all sincerity. It was just absolutely. Wow. We came home and registered for it next year and bringing people with us. Not because it's a fun conference or, the music's really good. I used to I was a DJ on Southern gospel stations and country gospel stations. So I know good music, but this wasn't just good music. This was worship, and worship does something very, very meaningful to you that lasts. It's not gone when you drive home. And so thank you, Keith. It was great. It really was.
Mark, that's one of the most encouraging things I've heard. That's made my day. That's energized me. So it's good.
Mark, he doesn't need much more energy, so let's just hold off a little bit more on the compliments. But I do have to say this. One of the reasons that we have Keith and Kristen when she comes on, one of the reasons we have the Gettys on is because of their impact on the local church. You and I deal at the local church level. And I wrote a article, I think this week, and I was talking about hymns, hymnody, and hymnals. And one of the statements I made was the profound impact of the Gettys on hymnody in the local church. There's so much more like congregational singing. We're going to cover a lot of those in this two-part episode. And to our audience, you will be delighted to spend 2 episodes with Keith Getty, Mark Clifton, and much lesser so me as we talk about a wide range of issues. Hey, Keith, before we even get into how the Gettys are so powerfully impacting local churches, talk to us about Queen Elizabeth II, and talk to us about some of your comments, and tell us also. I know you don't want to, because beneath that veneer of brashness there is a humility, and you don't want to talk about the awards you've received, but I want you to talk about the recognition that Queen Elizabeth II did for you, and any other comments you have about her.
Well, thank you. It was very profound for me in one sense, in that, we opened this year's Sing conference with Psalm 100, all people that on earth do dwell, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. We got a big brass concert on it. And the reason for that was it was the hymn that was commissioned for her 70th, for her coronation 70 years ago. And I wanted just to I love to tie historical things into each year because I think it always helps. It roots us and grounds us in our heritage of who we are. And so we opened the conference. On the last day, we had, and some of you I'm sure read in the media, quite a lot of controversy over the three speakers on the last day, and dramas in different levels. Well, the first one was John Lennox, Kristen's uncle, who took a stroke just before it. The second was John MacArthur, where most of the controversies were. And then Johnny Tada, who almost didn't make it because her health almost made it not work. So I had three people very much in their closing years at best at the conference. And then the next morning, there was four of us from Britain sitting at the far outside at our house here, and the announcement that the Queen died. And so just all the context of running your life and running it faithfully. And ironically, the four of us had all spent time with the Queen. So it was just three of my mates. Ross Wilson is the current King's painter for King Charles II. Then James Ainscough, who runs our foundation, used to be the head of the Royal Albert Hall in London. And then John Kirkpatrick is the current moderator of the Presbyterian Church. But all four of us had different experiences of the Queen. And Thom, you and I have sat in your old office when you were in your Lifeway days talking about the danger of elevating spirituality in individuals who we only know at a distance. And so I want to be very careful and say that, my entire life face-to-face experience with the Queen lasts less than 5 minutes in terms of one-on-one conversation. It's all been at a distance or working. They've used our hymns at different things as well. So my conversation is very little, but there was a transformation around about 2001 that the Queen decided, I'm going to be very open about my faith. Now, her father had faith, and his father as well, George V and George VI, were both men of faith. And she took on that faith. She had a lifelong friendship. Her two closest Christian friends were Billy Graham and John Stott, which is pretty good mentoring. Wow. She always had the thing about the Queen Elizabeth II, she always had great mentors. You talk about consistency in leadership, and so much of it is found by who your heroes are. Her first over 14 prime ministers, her first prime minister was Sir Winston Churchill. So for all his failures, she learned from the start what it was to be an epic leader. When you look at how he looked at leadership and the world and life and the future and saw into the future, I mean, he really makes most modern leaders look like pygmies. Do you know what I mean? And so she always had great leaders, but she was always quiet about her faith. And then about 2001, she made this transformation across. And suddenly in the Queen's speech, which is a highly political thing, she would make this comment, like one comment she read out one year. I was sitting watching with my parents, and she goes, although we are capable of great acts of kindness, history teaches us that sometimes we need saving from ourselves, our recklessness, our greed. God sent into the world a unique person, neither a philosopher nor a general, important though they are, but a savior with the power to forgive.
Wow. When did she first say that, Keith?
That was about 15 years ago. And of course, the funeral then, which was just a beautiful service, of course, it's the Anglican liturgy. So while the Anglican Church may have rejected the gospel, the Anglican liturgy still screams it. So you had this beautiful funeral service, and she requested over a decade ago that the final reading of her life would be John 14, which says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And there in the audience, the leader of the Buddhist faith, the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, the British media, which is somewhat more aggressive than what you guys think is left wing. We're kind of left, and then take another left at the end of the left side of the street. And she, but so she's forced that through, that will be the final reading of her life. And I think what I've learned from that is primarily ending well. I mean, we could talk as well about a life of liturgy. We could talk about, the fact that, she actually, interestingly, I met her when she was in Balmoral in Scotland. Balmoral was her preferred place, just outside Edinburgh. And she, when she was there, she always went to a Presbyterian church, a Church of Scotland church, interestingly, even though she was head of the Anglican Communion. And in the last 20 years of her life, the pastor there, the minister, they would call him minister, he says she only ever missed 2 Sundays. So you imagine how many wars broke out, how many prime ministers went down, and she, in all those years, how many family crises she had, how many public press disasters. She was also between the ages of 75 and 96, let's remember as well, and she missed 2 Sundays. So just the importance of church attendance, of getting yourself out to church and being there. In this small little church that she went to, and they came in with her, and she was there. So just so many sort of good practices. So I would say, I mean, if you're wanting sort of a leadership analysis, it's number one is the consistency of a life lived well. It's the liturgy of church and regularity of church and church attendance. And then I would also say with Queen Elizabeth, while she's consistent, and the people, all the portrayals are mostly saying this lady was basically really consistent while the British Empire collapsed, while the world collapsed, and while our kids were making a fool of her. But actually, she was a visionary. I think one of the reasons the Sing Conference is moving to the Sing the Great Commission this next year, and a third of it is actually about the future, is not because we're trying to stargaze, but it's because the great missionary movements were guys who had a vision of 50 and 150 years. Obviously, they primarily had a vision of eternity, but they were always thinking forward. And so much of the modern movement that I come, so much of the Reform movement and the conservative Bible movement at the minute is about conserving morals, making sure we all agree in Romans 3 and throwing somebody out of the room if they disagree with us, you know what I mean? And actually, a lot of these movements that we're now hitting, whether it's artificial intelligence or gender issues or global social political issues, these were issues that were there 30 years ago and we weren't discussing them. We weren't doing it. Whereas the Queen, to give you a couple examples, Queen Elizabeth, she had to live over the post-World War II change of culture where you no longer where the Commonwealth, basically every country wanted independence, and that's where the world has gone. And she was the one who had the vision to go to all the countries, to be present, to be with their leaders, to wish them well, to say, let's be part of a commonwealth of nations instead, so that while they got their independence, instead of going where almost all nations that get independence go, which is hatred for their old owners, she, in the vast majority of cases, managed to create these new bonds of friendship, these new bonds of trade, these new bonds of allegiance and alliance that have led to sort of a whole new generation. So she was great leaders, even the ones who look like they're kind of the sensible guy in the corner, they're always thinking 100 years ahead. So, I mean, we could talk all day about, leadership lessons and lessons for the church from Queen Elizabeth, but that's a few.
Well, no, this is fascinating. That's why we're doing this in two different episodes. Mark, I'm going to bring you in just a moment because I want to go back to singing. Before we end on anything on Queen Elizabeth II, talk about your recognition by the Queen.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about that before. It was the OBE, so it was the Officer of the Order of the British Empire. So it was 5-6 years ago. It was the first time I've been given to a church musician of the modern era. So that was a kind of a cool thing. I got to go meet her, and my mum got to buy a new hat, and she was thrilled. And so it was good. But it's been kind of interesting because it's allowed us, obviously, to do events in the Houses of Parliament and get access a little bit to some of the involved. The royal family have used our hymns at a different events. So it's been nice to kind of get just a tiny bit of influence in some of those circles, which has been fun.
What year was that?
I can't even remember. I think it was 2017.
Yeah, but I remember we discussed it back then. But
you were young. You were young then, Tom.
Yeah, you were too. That was when you were Kristen's husband instead of her father.
Yeah. You heard about that, Mark, didn't you? I got at the Sing conference. The guy.
Yeah, I was there. I heard about that. Actually,
daughter, it was so embarrassing.
I can commiserate with you. I was at the grocery store not long ago, and my wife was in front of me putting stuff on the cart on the scanner there, and the little kid running the grocery scanner, he put the little divider between my stuff and her stuff, and I said, "I'm with her." And he was like, he couldn't believe that we were together. And then a few days later, we're at a restaurant, and this little waiter comes over and he asks if we want separate checks. So it's like, no, we're together. Believe me, this woman is actually living with me, and we're married. So she looks a lot younger than I do. So I get it. Yep, totally.
Yeah.
So Mark, talk about your first time. You talked about it briefly, but talk about your first time experience with singing for the audience and for Keith to respond. Just go wherever you want to with that.
Yeah, truthfully, I mean, I've been to preaching conferences, evangelism conferences, church growth conferences, all kinds of things for all of my life. Preached at the Southern Baptist Pressures Conference last year in Anaheim. So I've been to a lot of conferences and done a lot of things. But from the time I got there, man, this was all about making much of God. This was about corporate worship. Individual worship is great, but corporate worship is we come together and we agree we're going to do this together. There's something you can't do corporately that you can't do individually that you can do corporately. And there's an experience that takes place in that. And, Keith, you don't, we've not met until now, but certainly Thom and I go way back, and we have a deep friendship, and he understands that one of the things that I've struggled with in my life is some depression, and the adversary really uses that on me. Man, I'll tell you, worship is a great antidote, it battles depression in our lives. And really having been there and experiencing that with my wife, and we got to do it together. That was so wonderful and so sweet. And just coming back and working with some really troubled churches and some really difficult situations, man, I have been invigorated in a way that I don't ever recall being invigorated before. And it wasn't just the music and the musicians and the crowd. It was really the presence of God that was very evident and very real to me and very impactful to me. And so I called Thom while I was there, and I said, this is much different and much deeper and much more impactful than I ever dreamed it would be. And so I've come back, and we've started engaging some of this in some of the replant churches I'm working with, having some night of singing. And my wife went last Sunday night to a night of hymn singing in a church, because it fits us for the battle, right? I mean, when Jesus went out in the garden that night, he went out singing a hymn. I mean, it fits us for the battle. And I think we've missed that a lot of times. We look just for answers of sort of how do we grow the church? How do we deal with the problems? And we forget sometimes the important part of worship has in all of that.
That's fantastic. That's so encouraging. That's so encouraging. My first thought is we do have to work out. Next year is Sing the Great Commission. We're looking at local in the first day, global in the second, and future in the third. And I'd love to chat to the two of you if we couldn't do something fun.
Well, talk to us about the details. Is registration open now?
Yeah, registration's open. Actually, your registration's open, and I'm terrible at this kind of stuff. I think it's Getty Music Worship Conference or gettymusic.com. You can go there. And
she's got it in the show notes, Keith.
Yeah, but they do. You got it.
Amy, who is not seen on the screen.
Amy is not seen. You mean of the four of us, the one person who's not seen is beautiful Amy?
Amy is not seen, and neither is our production manager, Akeem. You've never met Akeem. He's working hard in the background as well.
Akeem, are you out there?
He's not going to comment.
Okay. He's not available for comment. His lawyers.
He's working the dials, but his
lawyers have recommended he doesn't comment on this show.
Hey, talk to us. You said it's Great Commission. Anything else you want to add to it? Because I think I'm going to invite Nellie Joe and see if we can come.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I'll tell you what it is. I mean, next year, so it's basically 3 days. I mean, obviously, the first thing, I mean, Mark, I can't tell you what this means. You said that today. I guess the unique thing about the Sing Conference is at two levels. One is it's primarily about congregational singing and making our services, rich and full of the gospel. But it's a kind of a bizarre combination of three groups who don't usually meet each other, or as one of my friends says, don't even like each other. And so it's you've got pastors, preachers, and kind of missions guys in one corner, all the Bible teachers and evangelists there. Then the second group is you've got people right throughout the creative arts, primarily music, because it's primarily about church music. And so, but you get people right across the creative arts, highly creative, lots of them highly mad, and then thirdly, you get people who are involved in church music at every level, from the worship leader to the music director, to some choirs will bring their groups, worship teams will come. So that's basically, so you get this kind of bizarre blend of a sort of a highly creative and innovative approach to stuff. And then you also get really great Bible teaching, but I think the singing is the main thing. But again, the principle of it is it's both. I would say it's one of the team said it's about taking what happens in our back porch and giving it a crowd. So and everybody involved are kind of friends of ours, so they all know each other. So they're all kind of good fun. There's a good atmosphere, but at the same time, it's very global. We had 25 nations there this year, and our goal with the help of our foundation is to bring 100 nations next year. It'll be the most global worship conference in history, and it's looking at three things. It's looking at a number. First day, local. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be missiological in your local church? How do our services make the gospel clear, make the gospel beautiful, make the gospel attractive? And so on the singing level, we're looking at what that means. At putting the church service together, we're looking at what that means. But we're also then having, I think Rico Tice is doing a thing on one-to-one evangelism. Different guys are talking on different subjects. Then the second day is largely about what God's doing around the world. We've got Tom's Holy Trinity of David Platt, John Piper, and Danny Aiken kind of in the day, sort of throughout the day. And then we've also got speakers from every continent sharing about what God is doing, telling us stories, but really trying to put together music ministry with mission so that music departments would become known as a prayer source, as a prayer base and a missional base, which is what they should be, because most of the great missionaries who were all of your heroes were verging on obsessed with hymns. Do you know what I mean? There was so much part of their language. And so that's the second day. And then the third day, we're looking at key issues of the future, bringing in the likes of John Lennox, Andy Crouch, Jeremy Begbie, a lot of people, and looking at the future and saying, let's actually look at the future, because, if John 1 is right and he is light and in him is no darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome the light, then all of these issues that I'm terrified about for my little daughter shouldn't fear me. But not only that, as I think to the future, I should be thinking with confidence and with intelligence, and praying with confidence and intelligence about the future. So we want to be excited about the future. Obviously, the music, we've got a sort of a vocal group. We use primarily a black gospel kind of vocal group. There's a mass choir of 1,000. It's in the Bridgeton. It's in the Bridgeton Arena and also the Ryman Auditorium next year. So you get to do a little bit of both. And but the Bridgeton Arena events, we've got an 1,000-person choir, the old kind of Billy Graham style choir we're trying next year. But then we got a vocal group of 12 singers from each of the continents. And then our band, we've got musicians from all 6 continents, worship leaders from all 6 continents. And so I say really excited about it. But also we're looking, even on the future day, I've got one panel where we're taking three of the people who've inspired me as business guys. I'm doing actually an interview for 20 minutes, because actually musicians and missionaries actually compete for being the stupidest people on earth with money. I don't know which would win. It would be an interesting boxing match. Either way, we'd need bankruptcy lawyers. But I'm going to take three of our closest friends, or 3 of our closest inspirers, all of whom who could really trying to help people think about money and resources as well. So it's taking all these different things and having sort of a vision for the future. So the conference seems to attract an unusual number of what you would call entrepreneurs. So we thought, let's actually involve them next year, get them integrated into the conversation as well. So that's next year. We're looking forward to it.
So if you, the listener or the viewer, are about to get mad at me because I'm going to end this podcast, guess what? You get to come back next week and we'll do part 2 with the profound, the eminent, the articulate, the one who is above all in hymnody, Keith. And
let me just add this. Let me add one thing, Tom.
Yeah.
It is a conference and a festival. So there'll be at least 2 platforms where there's music events on till midnight every night. So there's lots of different music. It isn't just people who like Irish hymns with some, cute girl and her overweight husband who look like her father.
We'll be talking more about that. We'll see you. And I know you want to come back for the episode 2 with Keith Getty.